Hi, everybody. I'm Judy, the YouTube lawyer. In today's live stream show, we have a special guest who is an attorney in Raleigh, North Carolina, Stephen Epstein. He's a partner at Poynter and Spruill. He's been a civil litigator for over 30 years, primarily as a defense lawyer for companies sued for allegedly defective products or damages arising from allegedly improperly performed services. He subspecialized in fire loss claims, having been involved in hundreds of matters in which the cause of a fire was the central issue. And then more recently, he switched to doing more family law and is now a family law board certified specialist in North Carolina. And as if that weren't impressive enough, he graduated with honors from UNC, both for undergrad as well as law school. And he is the published author of two highly critically acclaimed books, one of which I have a copy right here because I just got it in the mail, Murder on Birchleaf Drive. So he's going to talk to us more about his legal career, how he became law partner, and then how he became a published author. So let's add Attorney Epstein to the screen. Hi, Steve. Thanks
Hi.
for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. Okay. Well, so usually with these interviews, I just start out asking what your background is, and can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you wound up going to law school?
Okay. So I grew up in New York, decided I didn't like New York a whole lot and wanted to move somewhere where it was warmer, where the winters, since we're in winter, it's apropos, where the winters were a little bit more hospitable. If you just saw what happened with this bomb cyclone and Long Island, New York getting absolutely pummeled with snow, that's where I grew up in Long Island. And I wanted to get out of there as quick as I could. And ultimately, a very smart computer in my high school told me I needed to go to UNC. And so I said, okay, I'm going to North Carolina. And I went there for undergrad, ultimately for law school, and pretty much have been in North Carolina ever since.
I see. And was it really weird coming to North Carolina
It
as
was.
someone
And
that grew
so
up in New York?
you can't hear my former New York accent now, but let me tell you that I was teased. I was scoffed at quite a bit for my very thick New York accent when I came to North Carolina in 1983. So the last 39 years have done a good job of erasing that New York accent. And now when I go back home to New York, people think I'm a Southern hick. But
Yeah,
it
you
was
sound.
it was a culture shock when I got here, which is interesting because
Mhm.
Murder on Birchleaf Drive has a lot of those same elements to it. The culture shock of somebody growing up in the North or coming from a family in the North trying to assimilate here in North Carolina.
Mhm. Yeah, I see. So did you go to law school straight from college?
I did, yes. I went straight through. So 1987, I graduated from UNC undergrad with a degree in political science in 87. And then in the fall of 87, started as a first year law student at UNC.
Yeah. And what made you choose law school? Did you come from a family with other lawyers or people in the legal system?
Not at all. Again, I attribute that to my high school. There was a course called Young Lawyers that I took when I was, I think, either a junior or senior in high school, fell in love with it, did several mock trials in real courtrooms in New York, just as a high school student, and knew pretty much that's what I wanted to do and never wavered from that. So that was, back in the early 1980s, I already knew I wanted to be a lawyer and went to college and did political science because that seemed like a good thing to know going into law school, and immediately applied for law school. And the last 30 plus years is history.
hmm Yeah. And what did your parents think about your career choice?
They were wholly approving of it. And it was really my grandfather, who I dedicated that first book to, who was sort of the academic voice in my ear growing up. And he wanted me to do something that was befitting of a brain. And I think he was very approving of me going to law school. He wanted me to do something like that or business, which is what he did. He served as an executive in a company, and that wasn't anything I was interested in. But sort of reasoning my way through problems and arguing and things like that, that was my cup of tea, and that's why I went to law school.
hmm Yeah. And if you don't mind my asking, what did your parents do for a living?
So my father sold educational equipment to school systems.
Mhm.
Back then, it was tape recorders and
Oh,
books and things like that, long before the virtual environment we live in today. And my mother was a school teacher, but pretty much stopped doing that once us three kids came along. She did some substitute teaching after that, but pretty much stayed home to raise us kids.
Mhm. I see. Yeah, and I saw on your bio online that you clerked for Judge Britt
Yeah.
after law school. So can you tell us a little bit more about your experience being a law clerk? Because I often tell my viewers out there, if you're able to clerk for a judge, then you should definitely do that. It's very prestigious.
And I wholeheartedly agree, not necessarily because of how prestigious it is. It's a
Mhm.
great experience. There are obviously two different types of judges you can clerk for, a trial judge or an appellate judge. I anticipated becoming a trial lawyer, so I only set my sights on clerking for a trial judge, and it was a great experience. I saw lots of trials, interacted with lots of jurors and juries during the course of those trials. Judge Britt probably tried some 50 trials during my 2 years with him. So it was a great experience to see all that and the lawyering in action. And then if you're more bent on appellate work, doing an appellate clerkship is a great thing, whether at the state level or clerking for a federal appellate judge. So I think those things are good in and of themselves. Yes, they look good on resumes, but it is a great way to go from sort of the academic environment and bridge your way into a more practical environment of practicing.
Mhm. Yes. So where did you first work after your clerkship?
After my clerkship, I became a trial lawyer, a personal injury trial lawyer, clerking for some really excellent personal injury trial lawyers, Charles Beckton, Jim Fuller, and Ann Slifkin, and was there for a couple of years. There were some things that I liked. I tried a couple of cases right out of the chute, and that was fun. But I didn't like the tremendous responsibility that, as a very young lawyer, I felt on my shoulders, and also felt somewhat of an academic calling. And that led me to actually go teach law school for a couple of years, which I did from 94 to 96 before returning to the practice of law.
Oh, I didn't know you taught. Where did you teach and
I
what
was
did you
the
teach?
I was the director of legal writing at the University of Illinois. So I moved to Illinois. It's the only 2 years I haven't lived in
Mhm.
North Carolina since coming down here to go to college in '83.
Mhm. Oh, how interesting. Okay. So, did you feel compelled to stay around there or work in Chicago?
It wasn't Chicago, it's Champaign, Urbana,
Oh.
which is
Mhm.
right dead center in the middle of the state. There nothing but cornfields and just acres and acres of farmland as far as the eye can see. In fact, the law school was about 2 blocks from a cow pasture, and the stench from that cow pasture was so bad that even though the parking lot was 50 yards from the front door of the law school, I literally had to sprint into the law school every day because it smelled so bad. So
Okay.
um, that was my experience teaching law.
Mhm. I see. Okay. Well, so then where did you go when you left Illinois then?
So my first wife, I'm now married a second time. My first wife was horribly allergic to growing corn, and the house that we lived in literally was built on a converted cornfield. In fact, they
Oh.
were continuing to take that large cornfield and pave it every year and create new houses. And we were one of the last rows of houses, and she could barely leave the house. So we knew pretty much from the start that I had to try and find another job
Mhm.
outside of Illinois. And I tried to get another teaching job. The market back then and even today, it's a very, very competitive, vicious market. And I was not successful getting another teaching job. So I came back to the only place where I had a license, which was North Carolina, came back to Raleigh and started at Hunton and Williams, which was an international law firm. It's now Hunton Andrews Kurth. And I
Oh.
was there for about 14 years.
Oh, that's a really long
Yeah.
time. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, a lot of times, especially, I don't know if you've looked around on YouTube a lot, but there are a lot of videos out there where people are talking about big law and is big law worth it? And, why I quit working for my corporate law job that paid hundreds of thousands of dollars and stuff. But can you tell us what the reality is like working for a bigger law firm and being a law partner?
I mean, it all depends. The first thing I'll say, working for a firm of that size, and we had nearly 1,000 lawyers when I left, and I think 16 offices. The first thing is that if your goal is to make partner quickly, you're in the wrong place. But that said, the compensation is fabulous as a mid-level associate. So, the glitz and glamour of becoming a partner isn't really that important. But they do have, for young lawyers, they have high expectations in terms of the number of hours that you're going to work. The difficult thing for me wasn't the number of hours, it was the billable rate that they expected me to charge clients, which for a lot of clients here in North Carolina wasn't going to get me the client base that I needed to really continue to have a good practice 5, 10, 15, 20 years out. So I knew that there would be a time where I just couldn't sustain a practice where the rates I was charging to my clients were so high. And also in a firm that size, your autonomy is fairly limited. You do what you're told to do. The notion of me doing family law in my old firm would have been scoffed at and mocked. My current firm, which is a much smaller firm, we're big for North Carolina, but we're still pretty small. We have only like 90 lawyers. I get to do what I want to do in the way that I want to do it. And I love that freedom.
Yeah. So when you were working for Hutton and Williams, was that in Raleigh?
Yes, it was. That
Okay.
office doesn't even exist anymore, which is somewhat of a byproduct of the square peg round hole that I was feeling toward the end of my time there.
I see. And what were your work hours typically like?
Well, when I was an associate, my work, I had years where I billed over 2,100 hours, which, looking back on it, I just don't know how I did that. Like I said, went through a first marriage, and I'm sure the types of hours that I was working had something to do with that marriage failing, and saw plenty of lawyers who were more senior at the firm who were married 2 and 3 times. So you sort of get what you ask for. And if that's what you're asking for, be prepared to not spend a ton of time with your family, helping raise your kids and that sort of thing.
I see. And was your first wife an attorney also?
She was, but she was non-practicing.
I see. I see. Yeah. And you have children, right?
I do. They're all pretty much grown. My youngest is a junior in high school.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So have you been able to spend more time with your children since leaving the previous firm?
Yes, and I left in 2010. So for most of their lives, I've been at a firm with much more flexibility, greater freedom to sort of make my own day and decide what I'm working on. So I've had tons of time with them since 2010.
Oh, well, that's good because that's 12 years ago. So, yeah, it's not like, oh, I was absent for the first 15 years of their lives or whatever.
And I wasn't absent. It just killed
Yeah.
me to do all the stuff that I needed to do at work and then come home and bathe them and get up in the morning and feed them and that sort of thing. The notion of writing a book back then would have been pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it seems like you've devoted so much time to researching and writing all your books and stuff, and we'll definitely get into that later. So I guess in a nutshell, I think a lot of my viewers do kind of want to know, like, what does it take to become a law partner, and what are some of the qualities that somebody would need to have to make partner at a firm?
Okay, well, it's all going to depend upon what type of firm you're at. The smaller the law firm, the easier it is to make partner. Obviously, skill and talent and doing a good job for your clients, having clients come to trust and rely on you. The larger the law firm, the more important it is to have a client or set of clients who view you as indispensable. And when that happens, it's sort of the law of market economics. If you're indispensable, then at some point that firm's going to need to make you a partner, or you're going to wind up taking that client with you somewhere else. So at some point, it's a matter of self-defense for larger law firms to make their really talented associates who are very important to certain clients a partner, because if they don't, then that jeopardizes that firm's relationship with that client or that set of clients. But smaller firms, it's more like the firm that I work at now. It's more a question of time and good work. If you're here for the right amount of time and you do good work and have some of your partners and some of your clients say nice things about you, you're going to make partner. So again, it's very dependent on the type of law firm that you work at and what kind of job you do for your clients and your partners.
I see. And how many partners are there at your firm?
That's a great question. I haven't done the math. I know that there's at least 30 or 40, but I'm not sure of the exact number.
I see. And so are there a lot of other attorneys in your office that also do family law?
I'm it.
Oh,
I've had an associate and I have a part-time paralegal. I don't currently have an associate, so I rely on other firm associates to do research and things like that. But in terms of who shows up in court to do family law for Pointer Spruill, that's yours truly.
Oh, okay. Well, that's great. So
I'm the only game in town.
Yeah, the client knows who they're gonna get. There's not gonna be some switcheroo where
That's
someone with
correct.
2 years out of law school gets thrown in
I've
court.
inherited several cases like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so, what about I mean, looking at your website bio, it seemed like you have done so many, like, really big complex trials and complex litigation and everything. So do you do those other kinds of cases anymore?
Yes, I do. Probably about
Mhm,
it varies from year to year, but probably on average about a third of my practice is still
mhm.
complex litigation, products liability. There's a client, a bus manufacturer I've been doing work for 20 years, and I oversee all of their litigation in the United States. Just had a big case come in last week where we're
Mhm.
hiring a lawyer in Texas where I'll oversee that litigation and be involved in it. So yeah, my practice is, one minute I'm talking about bus crash on the highways in Texas, and the next I'm talking about equitable distribution. So
Yeah.
I like that. I like the diversity of my practice, and that's one thing I would say to your younger viewers is don't get pigeonholed and wind up doing the same sort of thing every day. I know a lot of lawyers who were doing a lot of asbestos back in the 90s and early 2000s, and you literally could wind up doing the same exact type of case every day, every week, every year, and that's going to get old, and you're going to burn out of doing that. So
Mhm,
I've always enjoyed having a lot of variety in my law practice, and I think that helps keep me interested and engaged every day.
mhm. I see. Okay. And even making partner, do you still feel that pressure to bring in the clients and somebody's keeping tabs of your hours or how much you generate?
I don't feel pressure, and I
Mhm,
work at a law firm that's very equitable. We just went through our process of compensation for this year. We're on a calendar year basis, and I know that the management committee of my firm treats everybody fairly each year based upon the work that they did, what they brought in. The people who work the hardest tend to make more money than people who work less hard, and that's fair. So
mhm,
when I'm working hard, I expect to be compensated for it. When I'm not working hard, I expect not to be compensated as well. And so
mhm.
that all comes with the territory.
Yeah. And what kind of advice would you have for any law students or young lawyers that are interested in working for your firm? Like, how would they be able to get a job with your firm?
Typically, we hire
Mhm,
law students fresh out of law school from our summer associate program.
mhm,
So we tend not to hire new lawyers that haven't previously worked in our summer associate program. So that would be my advice is to apply while in law school to try and become a summer associate at our firm. We typically have anywhere from 3 to 6 summer associates. We tend only to have 5-week programs where students are with us for half the summer. But if they come work for us, the odds are pretty good that if they've been a summer associate, they'll be extended an offer.
mhm.
And we have just so many of our lawyers here today, including several partners who started as summer associates in our law firm.
Oh, that's great. And is it pretty much required that the person be in the top 10% and be on the main law review?
Not at all. And equity, diversity, and inclusion is hugely important to us. We are very focused on trying to make our firm as diverse as possible. So we're not as interested in grades as we are in terms of what the person who we're looking at for potential employment will bring to us in terms of how will they make our law firm better. Not because they got good grades, but because they're bringing something that is different than what we currently have.
Mhm. I see. Well, that's good. That gives a lot of students some more hope as opposed to, "Oh, no, I didn't make the main law review. It's over."
And we have King Law graduates as well
Yeah.
as Duke Law graduates. There's no school that we look down upon and say we're not going to hire somebody from that school.
Mhm. That's great. Okay. Well, would you like to switch over and talk to us about the books that you've done?
Sure.
I wasn't able to order the book about the evil at Lake Seminole.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I didn't get that book, but at least I got this one. But I did all the reading I could about that case, and the more I started reading about the Florida case, the more like I don't know, more, like, baffled I was at what had happened to this poor guy because wasn't it his anniversary? He was supposed to be getting ready for his anniversary dinner, and
He would
then
so that's Mike Williams, who was
yes.
the victim in my second book, Evil at Lake Seminole, and he and his wife Denise had reservations for not just a dinner, but they were going to travel a couple of hours from their home in Tallahassee to the Gulf Coast to a place called Apalachicola, to a historic hotel called the Gibson Inn for an overnight at the Gibson Inn. the following day was actually their anniversary. So they were leaving on their anniversary eve. They were leaving sometime mid-afternoon. They had plans for Denise's sister to come take their child, Ansley, and care for her while they were gone. And Mike went hunting that morning. And he was supposed to come back so they can go on their trip, and he never came back. He went to Lake Seminole, where he'd been many times before, to go duck hunting, and he never came back. And massive search for him over the course of several weeks turned up nothing but a camouflage hat and a boat, and that was all that they were able to find. And it was quite a puzzle for 17 years.
Yeah, it's just mind-boggling that so many years went by and his body wasn't found until way, way later. Do you recall why was it that it took so long for somebody to find his body?
Because they were looking in the wrong place.
Well, obviously.
Because he wasn't at Lake Seminole.
Yeah, but it wasn't even that far. Like I read somewhere it said like his body was only found a few miles from where he grew up or
That's
wherever
correct.
it was in
That's
like
correct.
wooden
Because so
pile of wood or something.
the person who shot him in the face at point blank range that very morning was his best friend since high school, named Brian Winchester. And after Brian shot him at Lake Seminole, Brian thought he was going to drown. And the idea was it was a conspiracy between Brian and Denise because they were having an affair and had been for several years. The idea was that he was going to be pushed overboard, be wearing his waders, and that the waders would fill up with water and pull him underneath the surface to the point that he drowned. What Brian didn't count on was that there were a bunch of tree stumps in this very area, and Mike was able to grab onto a tree stump. He was also able to free his legs from the waders, and he was like, "What?" He's yelling, "Help! Help!"
Yeah.
His best friend had just pushed him in the water, and he's screaming for help. And so Brian had his shotgun because they were going duck hunting, and he said, "Okay, I didn't kill him the way I wanted. I'm just going to kill him a different way." And then he dragged his body out of the water in panic, tried to figure out what to do with it, and ultimately buried him on the shoreline at another lake, which was in Tallahassee, very close to where both Brian and Mike lived. And ultimately, that lake filled up more over the years. And so his body was ultimately literally under the lake. They had to move the lake in order to find his body. And they only knew where it was because Brian eventually confessed.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I didn't read all of these fine details, but so was Brian never a suspect towards the beginning? That just sounds
He
kind of
was. Both he and Denise were questioned, and there was always this suspicion. They got married, by the way,
yeah.
a few years after the murder, because nobody knew they engaged in this conspiracy. At least
Mhm.
everyone except Mike's mom,
Yeah.
Cheryl, had sort of moved on and assumed that. So the working theory from the folks at Lake Seminole was that Mike had been devoured by alligators,
Mhm.
and that's why his body was never found. But they were both sort of suspects, but the Florida law enforcement folks didn't have enough to go on until Brian was ultimately arrested, ironically, for kidnapping Denise when their marriage failed.
Yeah.
And ultimately, Brian came clean while he was in custody that he knew something and he was willing to make a deal.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, what a terrible betrayal. Not only the wife, which, you read that a lot where it turns out it's the spouse that killed the person or the former spouse, but to have his best friend shoot him, I mean, that's just I mean, it's very depraved, isn't it? I mean, I
That
guess
that
that's
story is one that if you had written it as fiction, um, most of your readers would have said it's not believable.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, so terrible, and what compelled you to wanna write a story about that? Like, how'd you even hear about the case?
So I was, as I say in the preface to that book, I was
Mhm.
looking for another story to write, and I was listening to a podcast as I was waiting for my son the son that I told you was currently a junior in high school, was waiting for him to come out of the locker room from a high school football game. And I started listening to this podcast on one of the true crime podcasts. And I was absolutely riveted when I heard this story. And I wrote to Cheryl Williams and several other people saying, I'm going to be writing this story. I'm interested in hearing from you if you're willing to help. But I'm going to write this story either way. And sure enough, Cheryl Williams called me like a week later, said, I want the whole world to know what happened to my son. And so she was terrific to work with throughout the process. And several other people who were friends with Mike contributed to what I learned and knew. And that was a huge difference between my second book and my first book. My first book had literally no help from any friends or family members. Fortunately, I had some 60 plus days of trial transcripts, and there was a lot of biographical material and storyline and timeline in those transcripts, but I was still able to put together the story.
Yeah, I read that towards the end of your book. I was like, wow, it's amazing you were able to still write a book when hardly anyone would talk to you. It's frustrating. But can you tell me more about, gathering the information from Cheryl Williams and the other people? Did you actually go down to Florida to try to talk to them in person?
So my interviews were all by phone. I went
Mhm.
down there in order to. You can still see me. Our lights just
Yes.
the
Uh-huh.
lights came back on.
Okay.
I think we just hit a certain hour and the lights go off here automatically.
Oh.
So I went down there because I like to get a feel for where things happen. And I actually took the photograph that's on the front cover of Evil Lake Seminole with my iPhone. But I
Mhm.
was on Lake Seminole and had somebody from the Fish and Wildlife Service take me out on a boat to the very spot where Mike was shot, just to get a feel for it. I think that helps me get a better understanding to write the story better. But all of the interviews I was able to do by telephone, and that's pretty much what I've always done is interview people by telephone. But I want to get a sense of some of the key places that were involved, and I did that by taking a trip to Tallahassee.
Yeah, so interesting. And so whatever happened to Mike's father? Was he still alive?
No, he wasn't. He died shortly before Mike's child was born, Ansley, who, by the way, is now 22 years old.
Mhm.
That's, I'm writing the story when he is killed when she is just like 18 or 19 months old, and she's now 22. That's how much time has gone by.
Oh.
But he died of a bizarre set of circumstances resulting from a motorcycle accident.
How sad. And were you able to talk with the daughter? With
Absolutely not. No, the daughter is a fierce defender of her mother, and no one on Denise Williams' side of the family would have anything to do with me or the project. And I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
And the same
Yes.
was true with Brian Winchester's family as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's kind of like with that Peterson case, right? Where those girls were like sticking with
Yes,
Michael Peterson. Yeah. Yeah, so interesting then. Oh, okay. So I didn't realize that the book about the Michelle Young case was your first book then.
that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Which
Well,
makes sense because that was a trial that occurred right here in Raleigh. And I followed that story
mhm,
sort of like everybody else did because it was a
yeah.
fascinating story. The legal battles were fascinating.
Mhm,
And so the only reason I wrote that book, A, I think I was having a midlife crisis and needed to do something different. And B, I was so riveted by that story and couldn't believe that no one had written a book on it. So nobody else
mhm.
was going to do it. I said, well, why not me?
Yeah, exactly. But how did you even have time to do this? It sounds like you had to do a lot of your writing late at night.
That's correct. I did a lot. Oh, I do a lot more early morning. I'm an early riser. Sometimes I get up way before I want to.
Mhm.
And for that book, I did a lot of 3 and 4 a.m. And then a lot of weekend. And I'm a week on, week off dad. So weeks off, I tend to get a lot more done than weeks on. So
Mhm.
between those two things, and that one took about close to 2 years to write and get finished and get published. So it took a long time. I didn't know what I was doing, but I did the best I could and got some help from a former News and Observer writer who's actually helped me on all three of mine, and submitted it to lots and lots of agents. Got completely shut out and then found this one publisher who was looking to start a true crime library and submitted they only wanted 3 paragraphs, and I submitted the first 3 paragraphs of the book. And
Mhm.
about 2 months later, I got an email back saying, "Go ahead and send us the first couple of chapters." And after the first couple of chapters, the next email back was, "Go ahead and send us the entire manuscript." And I hadn't finished the entire manuscript as of that point, so kind of worked hard to get the manuscript finished. And very shortly after I submitted the entire manuscript, had a publishing contract. And
Mhm.
that's kind of how that started.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, so it's not like you had to, just resort to self-publishing or whatever.
No, I didn't. No.
Yeah. So did your publisher help do some I don't know what they do, but like help you with publicity or try to help you sell more books?
So depending up, mainstream New York publishers do a ton of that, right?
Hmm.
The smaller the publisher, the more you as an author are going to be expected to do on your own. The publisher will do some, but they don't have a massive marketing budget. So yes, they do some marketing on Amazon, on Facebook, and things like that, but you have to do a lot of your own marketing. And I did for Murder on Birch Leaf Drive, and that was pre-COVID. So I was able to get to a lot of different places, libraries, bookstores, things like that, give talks, and it was good and successful, and I enjoyed it a lot. And then unfortunately, I literally sent Evil Lake Seminole off to my publisher in March of 2020.
Oh,
Thinking that I was going to be doing the same sorts of things in
yeah.
Florida because that's where that story takes place, and the whole world shut down, and I didn't really get to do any marketing for Evil at Lake Seminole. So I did a couple of virtual talks, didn't really enjoy the format, and don't think they went over well, and pretty much gave up on trying to do marketing in the COVID world.
Hmm. Yeah, I see. Yeah, I mean, because it sounds like you did a lot of networking amongst the legal community, like bar association events and things to let people know about your book.
Yes,
So,
and there were legal magazines in North Carolina. Both the bar association, state bar magazines included a story on the book. Lawyers Weekly did, so it was easier. I had connections here because the story was here. It was more interesting here. I'm a lawyer here, so all of those things made it a lot easier for me to market that book. And then that book. 2/3 of the book is inside the courtroom, so it was very interesting to lawyers, and
mhm.
so I was able to do targeted marketing to lawyers, and that's probably 30 or 40% of all the people who have read Murder on Birch Leaf Drive. My second book wasn't nearly as geared to lawyers because it was a more general interest story.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, this seems like it might be a really good book if some of those law professors at UNC or any of the other law schools around here would have their students read this book or talk about it in terms of criminal procedure, because I thought it was very interesting. I
Yeah,
didn't really know all the nuances about, appeals and, the appellate arguments and everything. And I think it was probably weird that the now Judge Brian Collins had to go and testify to basically say that, yeah, I did a crappy job or I did something wrong during the trial. So that's why the guy should be able to win his appeal. So,
yeah, there were very interesting twists and turns in that case.
mhm.
And if you're a lawyer, even if you're not a criminal lawyer, and I'm not a criminal lawyer, I've never practiced criminal law, but those trials are pretty easy to follow as a lawyer, whether you're a criminal defense lawyer or prosecutor or somebody who's never done anything remotely like that. It's sort of what you've seen on TV and in the movies since you
Mhm.
were little, and that's kind of what happened in that case. And it was the twists and the turns were just fascinating.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it seemed to just drag on for so many years where he keeps winding up back in court and everything. And yeah, I was kind of sad to hear that because I knew of Mike Klinko's son. I had no idea he had a stroke, but
Yeah.
yeah, that was sad to hear that. I mean, do you know anything else about how he's doing?
He's doing fine. He just has, as I understand it, his short-term memory is virtually non-existent. So he remembers things from months and years ago. In fact, he probably remembers virtually everything written in that book.
Mhm.
But he can't drive and certain things because it's not safe for him because he'll very quickly forget what he was doing or where he was going or those sorts of things.
Mhm.
He's also lost a ton of weight. He was quite overweight at the time of the trial, and so, he's married, he has a good family life. So there are a number of things. He can't practice law. It's just not possible in the state that he's in to practice law. But as I understand it from people who know him well, he's doing well. He was brilliant too. I mean,
Mhm.
if you pick up nothing else from this book, the lawyers just on both sides really did a fabulous job in lawyering that case,
Mhm.
particularly Jason Young's lawyers who were working completely for free
Mhm.
because Jason Young, by the time he was charged, had run out of all of his money and was represented by the Wake County Public Defender's Office, which Brian Collins ironically started as the
Mhm.
first public defender.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's what I found so interesting. It's like, well, a lot of times people are down on public defenders and stuff, but he had like a real dream team, you
He
know?
absolutely did, which
Yeah,
cost him not a penny.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm actually going to be arguing a motion in front of Judge Collins on Tuesday. So it was kind of cool to, read about him because I really didn't know that much about him until I read your book last night. So that's
Yeah, and that's
really cool.
another neat, interesting thing about that particular story is that the people who were involved in, and one of the reasons that nobody talked to me is because it was so emotionally intense. And even Brian Collins, who represented Jason Young, has a very difficult time talking about the case because he's that emotionally affected by it. It was such a huge part of his experience as a public defender over all those years. And the intense emotions of somebody being tried for first degree murder for killing their wife in the most horrible way possible.
Mhm,
He's kind of moved on from that, and he really doesn't want to talk about it. And lots of folks,
mhm,
including Michelle Young's friends, family
mhm.
members, they're the same. They just have a very difficult time going back there.
Yeah, exactly. It's like opening up their wounds and
Exactly.
everything. So whatever happened to the little girl is as far as you know, did she just continue to be raised by her aunt?
That's correct. And she is a senior now at
Mhm.
Cary Academy, and by all accounts has done extremely well.
Oh.
So, yes, her aunt Meredith has raised her ever since they got custody of her, which, if you read the book, you'll
Mhm,
see that that happens a few years after the murder. And she's done very, very well considering. How much she knows about all of these events, I don't know. But my understanding is that she has kept her paternal grandparents involved in her life. I don't know the extent to which she has a relationship with her father, who's been in prison all this time, but I know that she, from what I've heard, she does have a relationship with Jason Young's parents.
mhm. Okay, well, that's good to hear. Yeah, and just to be nosy, I did look up the house, so it looks like the house did get sold years ago, and
Oh, yes,
no,
it did. I
somebody got
actually
a
knocked on the door of that house,
what?
telling
You
the
knocked
folks
on the
living
door?
there that I was writing a story about this case, and the door slammed shut in my face.
Oh, well, that was rude.
As I said, I like to go to the places that are involved in a story to get a
Mhm,
feel for them. And I was going to try and work my way inside that house to get a feel from the inside of the house, other than what I've seen in photographs and video. But that wasn't happening.
mhm. Yeah. Well, when all the actual stuff was going on in court, did you ever go to watch in person?
I did not, but I did watch live. If I
Mhm,
remember right, I watched live part of Brian Collins' closing argument.
mhm,
And I think I watched part of Jason Young's testimony as well. So I remember being riveted at the time. And then all those years passed, and I was like, okay, I'm going to write a story about this.
mhm,
But those are the two parts that I remember. I remember watching part of Brian's closing argument in the first trial. I remember watching, if not all of Jason Young's testimony from the first trial, a good chunk of it.
mhm.
And
I
obviously, I
see.
watched all of that. Again, all of that was still available on WRAL News. I was able to watch all of both trials on video long after the fact.
Yeah, it's great that all this information is still available out
Yeah.
there. Did you know there's some woman that wrote a story about why the guy is innocent?
Yes, I did. So when I said a book, no book had been written, that
Mm,
wasn't literally true. There is a book, I think, called Absence of Evidence, written by a woman who's written a couple of these books where she's very critical of law enforcement and prosecutors. And it was a completely one sided, slanted view. And in fact, she was working directly with Jason Young's sister, and basically trying to tell a story completely through the lens of Jason Young's family.
mhm. Yeah, so you do wonder, like, what's her ulterior motive? Yeah, for
I don't know. My books, I try and let my readers make up their minds. And in fact, when I was doing the book readings that I was doing for Murder on Birchleaf Drive, I'd often take a show of hands to find out how many people believe that Jason Young was actually guilty and how many didn't. And I was always surprised to find even people who had read my book, a handful of people here and there who didn't believe he had been proven guilty.
Mhm. I see. Okay.
And I
Well,
actually had
interesting.
one of the jurors from the first trial in my one of my audiences, which
Oh.
it was hard to focus. So that was one of my book signings. I also went
Mhm,
to New York,
mhm,
to Michelle Young's hometown, and did another book signing there. Her mother flew up. Michelle Young's mother flew up from North Carolina to be at that event, even though she never spoke to me while she was there. And the entire time I'm speaking, I read the first chapter and I'm talking about the book writing. And I'm scanning the room as I'm reading, and I just keep saying, "Well, there's Linda Fisher. There's Linda Fisher sitting in the back row." It was very hard for me to stay focused when I knew Michelle Young's mother was sitting there, because she had never spoken to me throughout the entire process,
Mm-hmm.
and she literally snuck out of the room without saying a word to me while I was signing books for other people who wanted books.
Mm.
But those were the two most interesting people who showed up at my book signings.
Yeah.
Linda Fisher in one of the New York book signings, and then at one of the libraries here in Raleigh, one of the jurors from the first case showed up, first
Mm-hmm.
trial.
Well, did you have a conversation with the juror?
I absolutely did, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And that juror was one of the 4 jurors who voted to convict Jason
Mhm.
Young. And had she and the other 3 not been as strong in their convictions about his guilt, that would not have been a hung jury. It would have been an acquittal, because the vote was 8-4 in favor of acquittal, and Jason Young would have walked free.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
here we are all these years later, some 10 years later, and he's been in prison.
Mhm. Yeah. Although it is very strange that, that Ms. Fisher would have gone through such great lengths to show up to the book are you sure it was her? How
Oh,
can you
100% sure. Yeah. So what I heard from a friend, a mutual friend, was that she came because she didn't want all of her friends who she knew from her hometown would be there to, she wanted to be there for them. So that was the story, is she went to the book signing because she knew all of her friends who cared so much about Michelle would be there, and she wanted to be there as a show of appreciation for them, not for me or
Oh,
for the book.
oh, well, it would have been nice if she had said something to you or written you a note or whatever,
That's all right. I understand, and I understand she's read the book, and the same mutual friend was able to share with me that it was very hard for her to read the book, and I 100% understand that. These are very tough subjects,
Mhm.
and some people, my wife, for instance, has not read my books because true crime isn't her thing. It's very difficult for her to read about these real events. I'm turning to fiction soon, and she's told me, "I'll read every single one of your novels, but these
Mhm.
things that happen to real people, it's too tough to read."
Yeah, that's true, and it might, kind of make her start feeling paranoid too, you know?
No, she's scared to death. Every time I write about some horrible killer, she's like, "Our address is public record. Somebody's going to come find us and kill us."
Yeah, you never know, like crazy people showing up at a book reading to like scream and yell at you or something. So, yeah. Well, we do have a couple of questions here in the chat box, though, and so I guess we should switch gears to talking about the career stuff again. Serena is one of my active viewers. Thanks for being here. She says, "Hi, Mr. Epstein. It's nice to see another New Yorker. Thanks for sharing. How many actual hours did you work when you billed 2,100 hours back then? And had you thought of an in-house role in your career?"
So I'd have to guess, but if I recall correctly, we had a non-billable expectation of 400 hours per year. So if you do the math, then I probably spent 2,500 hours or thereabout in the year where I would have billed 2,100. But I reliably billed at least 2,000 every year because that was the expectation. So somewhere between 23 and 2,500 hours per year of actually working would have been my norm. No, I was not interested in an in-house role. I'm just not inclined. I don't have a business inclination, so I was never inclined to work in-house, and never became that close with in-house lawyers at a company where anybody was seeking to poach me from my law firm to bring me in-house. So I never had an offer, and I wasn't really looking for one.
Mhm. Yeah, it seems like in-house counsel positions are very rare.
They
Yeah.
are, and they're coveted, and they're good gigs. That you get lots of benefits working in-house, and you don't bill your hours, which is a nice thing.
Mhm.
And you get to work with great lawyers from all the law firms that work for the company. So it's a great job if you have a business inclination. But there, as you said, Judy, there are far fewer of those jobs than there are law firm jobs.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. And the next question is, how did you time manage regarding a law career and trying to pursue other projects? I work full-time at a large financial investment firm, and I'm studying for the LSAT. I barely find time in the present.
It all depends upon, what's important to you and how you make time in your day. I don't spend a lot. My wife will be the first to tell you, I don't spend a lot of time just sitting in front of the TV, relaxing, doing fun stuff that most everybody else does. I like my mind being fully engaged, and so When I have time to do other things, I do. I'll take a break after I'm working on a third book. I'll take a break after finishing it, but it probably won't be more than 2 or 3 months before my mind gets fidgety and I want to start working on another project. But that's just me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also saw online that you're also on the board for the Little Theater. Is
Yes,
that
Raleigh
right?
Little Theater.
Yeah. So how do you have time to do that also?
That's not a tremendous amount of time. We have board meetings and committee meetings a few hours a month, so it's not a tremendous time commitment.
Mm-hmm. Are you into acting yourself?
I'm not. My daughter
Mm-hmm.
grew up spending lots of hours on stage and taking classes and teaching classes at Raleigh Little Theater, and she's now an acting major at the University of Alabama. So I kind of took that. Give me
Uh-oh.
light. There we go.
It's nighttime.
I don't know. So I took the position on the board of Raleigh Little Theater, kind of to honor her time that she spent growing up with Raleigh Little Theater and the big difference that made in her career, her path. We don't know if that's going to be her career yet. She's still
Mm-hmm.
working at it, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. I see. Okay. And Serena asks, I see you're in the office on a Sunday. Is that normal? What is your work-life balance now, and what's your typical day like?
Well, I'm here for you guys. I came into the office because
Oh,
this was going to be a better setting than my dog trying to bark its way through
thanks.
Judy interviewing me. So I
Okay.
came in just for this. I am never at work on the weekend, never, ever, ever.
Mhm.
And my work life balance now is terrific, so much so that I spend at least 1,000 hours a year working on book projects. And I have plenty of time and opportunity to do that. My typical day is going to vary from one day to the next. Some days I'm in court, and these days that could mean being on a screen. Some
Mhm.
days I'm in a deposition or mediation. COVID has made life very challenging and interesting because you never know if you're going to be live or virtual. I have been in squares and looking at squares on my screen for 2 years now. I'm sick of it. Not this one. This is fine.
Thanks.
But I'm looking for a day when we sort of get back to normal again. But my every day is going to vary from day to day, and my level of how busy I am. Last year, I had 1 month where I billed about 170 hours, and I had 1 month where I billed 35 hours.
Oh,
So pretty wild extremes, and that's the life of a litigator generally, not just a family law attorney.
yeah. Oh, Brian says, kudos for supporting your daughter like that. Oh, that's great. Okay, so here's another question. How do litigators decide whether to take a case or client?
Okay, so litigators versus family law, they're two different things. Judy, as you know, family law
Mhm.
always begins with an initial consultation where you
Mhm.
have the luxury of telling the person after you've met them, no, I'm not going to be your lawyer, because an initial consultation isn't actually a representation. Litigation is different. I have landed litigation clients from all sorts of different ways, including the most sensational way was what's called a beauty contest, where I actually had to fly to a business in Atlanta and present myself to the senior executives of the company who were having basically a competition to decide who was going to represent them in a monstrous piece of litigation, which fortunately I ended up with. But sometimes it's just a call. Somebody got a complaint. They need to find a lawyer. You were recommended by another lawyer friend or someone, and they want you to start working on the case immediately. There are a variety of ways in which you could wind up with a litigation matter.
Mhm. And for some firms, it's because of an insurance company relationship, right?
That's
Where
correct. So I've never done insurance defense work, but lots of lawyers who do defense work, civil litigation, there's a third party involved, which is the insurance company. The insurance company is not the true client, but the insurance company is paying your bills, giving you sort of the restrictions on what you can and can't do in representing your client, is going to sift through your bills meticulously, and that's how you're going to get paid every month. So I've never had that tripartite relationship where an insurance company was involved. To the extent I do civil litigation and defense work, it's always been directly for larger companies, and I'm generally working directly with their legal departments.
Mhm. I see. So would you say a lot of it is word of mouth referrals?
Yes, a lot of it is
Mhm.
word of mouth referrals, and I have this one big client that I've been doing work for 20 years. So always a part of my pie each year is work for that client, and it's always a not insignificant part of my pie.
Mhm. I see. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's see. Getting back to Brian congratulating you on supporting your daughter, like, have you tried to persuade either of your children to go into law as a career?
No, and I have two stepkids too. So I have five kids and stepkids, and one of them, my oldest stepchild Enzo, looks like he may have an interest in pursuing law as a career. He's currently a sophomore at UNC. We'll see what happens with him. But no, I want my kids to figure out what their thing is. So my daughter, it's acting, and my son, who's currently a sophomore in high school, tells me that his thing is finding a way to become a video game designer. So we'll see.
Oh, how interesting. Okay. Well, that's great that they have different interests and you're supportive of that. Yeah. Well, we do have a little bit of time left. So would you like to tell us more about your next book project? Because you and I were already talking about it. I'm very interested because I really followed that case over the years.
Okay, so that case is the Dan Markel case,
Mhm.
which was a murder of a law professor in Tallahassee, Florida. He was a very well-known law professor, teaching in the area of teaching and writing in the area of criminal law at Florida State University. He had written a book and about 20 plus articles in a relatively short time span. He had been a law professor for 9 years. He was also one of the first bloggers on the internet, blogging about the legal academy, law schools, scholarship, and those sorts of things, founding a blog called Prof's Blog. Was just extremely well connected throughout the law professor world, and was in a marriage that failed. He had two young children. His wife was a clinical law professor at Florida State University. They split up. It was a bad split. They had very different ideas about their children and what was important for their children. And most significantly, Wendy Adelson's family lived in South Florida, which was 7 hours away from where they were living in Tallahassee. And she wanted to go back and live with her family. And she wanted to take her kids with her. And ultimately, they had a hearing in family court in Tallahassee. And the family court judge said, no, you can't relocate with your kids to South Florida. That happened in June of 2013. In July of 2014, a car, a Toyota Prius, pulls up in the garage, just outside the garage of Dan Markel's home. He's in the driver's seat of his Honda Accord, and one of the occupants of that vehicle gets out and shoots him twice in the head and kills him. And from that day forward, Tallahassee police and even the FBI were on the trail of trying to figure out who was in that Toyota Prius and why they were there. It turned out that the gentlemen in the Toyota Prius were lifelong criminals who had very lengthy rap sheets, and they were able to establish they had driven from South Florida with one purpose: to kill Dan Markel. It turned out that one of the occupants of that vehicle had two children with a woman named Catherine McBanoa. Catherine McBanoa, at the very time of the murder, was dating Charlie Adelson, Wendy Adelson's brother. And the suspicion ever since that discovery was made was that Charlie Adelson was instrumental in hiring those hitmen, and that even Charlie and Wendy's mother, Donna Adelson, was intricately involved in the plot to kill Dan Markel, primarily because they wanted those children, Charlie's nephews and Donna's grandchildren, to be raised in South Florida where they could be with them. And the bitter irony is, since 2014, that's exactly what's happened. None of the Adelsons to date have been charged. The two hitmen have both been convicted of murder, and Catherine McBanoa had a mistrial in the first trial that occurred in 2019. In a couple of weeks, she's going to be retried for first-degree murder for her role in connecting Charlie Adelson and the Adelson family to the two hitmen who killed Dan Markel.
Mhm. And weren't there a lot of suspicious transfers of money between, whatever her name is, Magbanua
Catherine
and Charlie?
McBanoa.
Yeah, but, I seem to remember reading some article where, she was claiming she was doing work for Charlie Adelson's dental practice or something, but
So Harvey Adelson, the patriarch of the family, was a dentist.
Mhm.
Received his dental training in New York before he moved the whole family, before he and his wife moved down to South Florida to start raising a family. And then Charlie went to dental school and ultimately became a periodontist, but he both worked for the Adelson Institute and also did a lot of work in dental offices doing extractions and implants at other offices. And what was discovered in the investigation was that Catherine McBenna will receive checks every 2 weeks from the Adelson Institute as if she were working for the Adelson Institute. Those checks started just a couple of months after the murder. And as it turned out, she admitted on the witness stand that she had never worked for the Adelson Institute. But she sort of concocted a scheme with Charlie Adelson, as well as his mom, who signed each and every one of those checks, to defraud the government so that she could get health insurance for her kids and not have to pay for it. And that was the whole scheme, as she testified in her own defense at the trial, as to what those checks were really for. But the other interesting thing is that she had cash deposits going into her 2 bank accounts that she was putting through ATM machines that were tenfold or more the number of cash deposits or the amounts of cash deposits she had in the months and years preceding the murder. And the question was, well, where did all that money come from? She claimed at trial that it came from having worked at various clubs, sophisticated clubs where people would go to do highfalutin drinking in South Florida, and that she was getting cash tips, and that she just got so much in cash tips that she was able to put all that money into the bank, and it had nothing to do with the payoff that she got, which, by the way, one of the hitmen testified that her payoff was something in the neighborhood of $25,000, $30,000, $35,000. And the amount of money that she put into the bank would be consistent with that. But she also wound up having Charlie Adelson's Lexus retitled to her shortly after the murder, and all kinds of other things like that you have to ask the question, why did any of that happen? Why did all of those great benefits start coming her way? And the last of which was she had breast augmentation surgery shortly after the murder. And there was no way to trace the $4,000 that was paid for the surgery. She claimed she paid for it from her own money, but there was evidence that people had heard Charlie saying, or she saying, that she got the money from Charlie Adelson.
Is she still in a relationship with him?
No, that relationship, by the defense lawyer's own arguments to the jury, that relationship ended shortly after the murder. But yet most of these benefits that came to her occurred long after the murder. So again, why? Why was she the beneficiary of all of those good things if she had nothing to do with the murder and she wasn't any longer the girlfriend of Charlie Adelson? There's also a fascinating undercover sting operation that occurred in that case, where Donna Adelson was handed a note by someone claiming to be the brother of one of the hitmen and seeking $5,000 or else. And all of the phone chatter on 2 wiretap lines that occurred after that bump between Donna Adelson and this undercover agent, just fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I remember watching that on TV. Was that the Dateline special or?
Yeah, some of that was covered on the Dateline special. There's also a podcast called Over My Dead Body on Wondery, which is terrific. And my book is going to be way more comprehensive than the Dateline episode Over My Dead Body, just simply because the book medium gives you a lot more opportunity to dig deeper into the story.
Oh, great. Okay, well, I hope you'll come back in the future when the book comes out so we can discuss this more.
I would love to.
That would be great to be the whole subject of another show. So
in the meantime, the book is going to be called Extreme Punishment.
Extreme Punishment. Okay. Yeah. And on that note, it does seem so cruel that Dan Markel's family doesn't even get to see the children, right? Those 2 little boys.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So
ultimately, the mom, Wendy Adelson, started denying them the opportunity to be with their grandchildren. That happened a couple of years after the murder.
Yeah. And it seems like, wasn't Dan an only child?
No, he
No,
has
he had
a sister who was 3 years older than he.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, but it's still so awful. It's just like with the Young case where the grandmother and the sister at first couldn't even see Cassidy, and
Correct.
It's just so awful.
And it leads to the whole grandparents' rights issues, which comes right back to family law. And in Florida, there's a bill that just passed a committee within the last couple of weeks and it's called the Markel Bill. To extend significantly the rights of grandparents in certain situations where criminal activity is involved and a parent is preventing grandparents from seeing a child when the parent has some criminal taint around them, like Wendy Adelson does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very important. Do you have a few more minutes to answer some more random
Sure.
questions? Okay, I didn't know if you're in a rush to go home. Okay, what are the characteristics of a good client? And if the insurance and the client's interests are different, what does the defense lawyer do if he or she is supposed to represent both of them?
I'll take the
Okay.
last one first because that's like a standard ethical question that is answered by all kinds of opinions in North Carolina, and I'm sure other state licensing associations. A lawyer owes his duty to a client. A lawyer does not owe his duties to an insurance company. So ultimately, the lawyer has to do what's right by the client. Now, the insurance company can control the purse strings in terms of how much research can be done, how much travel can be done, but ultimately the lawyer owes his duty solely to the client, not to an insurance company.
Mm-hmm.
So the other question, if you'd go back to that one,
Oh.
Judy, characteristics of a good client, I'll use family law
Mm-hmm.
to do, not being crazy, that's
Mm-hmm.
good.
Pay your bills.
Pays bills, that's good, although get a good retainer at the front end to make sure, just in case. Um, Follows instructions well, is willing to hear when they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing and to correct behaviors. An open mind. The client has to have an open mind to the possibilities and not always thinking they know what's best or what should happen. Those are all good things in a client. Clients that are rigid, that always know best, that display signs of unhappiness from the get-go are bad clients to have because they're ultimately going to think that they're in a bad position because of you, their lawyer, when the reality is probably the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes from the very first consultation, you can already tell this isn't going to be a good client. I don't want to represent this person.
Which is what, as a family law attorney, you get to do. And I've done that so many times and said,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, I just don't think I'm the right lawyer for you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've very rarely done that, but there was one time recently when I just basically tried to pawn it off on another law firm. I was like, well, you have so many assets that I think you need a bigger law firm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. This is a kind of a specific question. I heard someone say a good lawyer can rip apart an ironclad prenup. What are your thoughts? I don't. I don't think so. I
Well,
mean,
and
from
I
what
will
I.
tell you that prenups are so rare. I've only had one case where a postnup was significantly involved in the case. I have not had been doing this for 7 years now, have not had a single case where a prenup was involved. Prenups are extremely, extremely rare. And a well done prenup, you can't work your way through it. A well done prenup where somebody who's about to be a spouse waives alimony, for instance, is probably going to be stuck with that waiver
Mhm.
forever. There are some limitations in our statute. Spouse can't be destitute or in poverty. So if that would be the situation, our statute would override a prenup. But outside of that situation, an alimony waiver as part of a prenup. I've had a case that involved a reconciliation agreement where alimony was waived as part of spouse getting back together with their spouse. That also, if it's done right, it's very hard to overcome. So I don't agree with the statement that a good lawyer can rip apart an iron
Yeah.
prenup. But I'll also say that issue arises almost never.
Yeah, that's right. And most lawyers, if they think that it could be kind of a tricky situation, like if one person doesn't know English that well, then usually they will try to, they'll be sure to get an interpreter or an attorney that speaks that language, because I've been consulted with where somebody want to bring over somebody from China and they want to make sure that that prenup is going to be upheld. So they're like, hey, Judy, you want to come and represent this person. So, um, yeah, so this is a totally different question. Has being a lawyer made it difficult to be there for your kids? I have a child. I'll be starting law school in the fall. And one thing I'm worried about is if I'll have time for my child.
Well, those are two different questions. There's the law school
Yeah.
aspect, and I certainly felt like I had a very distinct advantage over classmates who had children and families because I had enough time to do the readings every night and to prepare ridiculous number of hours before each exam. And even back then, and it's 30 plus years ago that I was in law school, really felt for folks who had young children at home who just couldn't commit that kind of time. It's difficult, but if you're committed to it, you can get through it. And being a lawyer, as I've tried to make clear from the outset, the type of lawyer you are and the number of hours that you work is going to be very dependent upon the environment that you create for yourself, whether you're a sole practitioner, work for a small firm, work for government, in-house. And depending upon that environment, you can certainly have enough time to be there for your children. You just have to pick the environment that fits your lifestyle and where you are in life the best.
Mhm. Yeah, and I do have a couple of friends who were pregnant during law school, and
Mm.
I don't know how they handled it. They probably had their moms come and help out with the baby, or maybe take a semester off or whatever. But they all got through it and are practicing attorneys now. So it can be done, but you definitely have to have a lot of time management and be willing to pay for daycare or have an in-law or your parent. Somebody needs to
Certainly,
help you.
those who are not attached and don't have children will have an easier time in law school than those who have a lot more commitments.
Mhm.
But if you're like anything else, if you put your mind to it, you can get it done.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I think we covered all the questions. Serena says, "Thanks for sharing. Wishing your books much continued
Thank you so
success."
much.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really looking forward to reading the next book. So how much is left to keep writing on that one?
The trial that's happening in a couple of weeks,
Oh.
and outside of that, the rest of the book is written,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
I'm sort of editing and polishing, which I could do for years until somebody says, okay, it's time to get this manuscript to the publisher. And at this point, I can't get the manuscript to the publisher because there's another trial. But once that trial's done, I hope to wrap up fairly quickly, and
mhm.
hopefully the publisher will have the manuscript sometime in March or April.
Yeah. And is the trial going to be live on TV somewhere?
Yes, so sure, a Tallahassee Democrat, I'm sure will be live streaming the trial, and the
Mhm,
local TV station will probably be live streaming the trial. So that's the jury selection starts on February 14th. They're hoping to finish the trial the following Friday, which would be a very short trial compared to the first one. Only one defendant this time instead of both Catherine Magbanua and Sigfredo Garcia, the
mhm,
baby daddy of the two kids, who's allegedly the one who put the two bullets in Dan Markel's head.
mhm,
So it's the 14th and the 15th will probably be jury selection. Then the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday would be the beginning of the prosecution's case, and the second week would end the prosecution's case and get into the defense case. There's even a rumor that Sigfredo Garcia, who's been transported to Tallahassee to potentially testify, will be testifying for the baby mama,
Oh.
Catherine Magbanua, in her defense at the second trial. He's already
Hmm.
been convicted. His appeals have been exhausted. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison
Mhm.
unless he makes a deal. And I think in the meantime, he's going to see what he can do to get Catherine Magbanua acquitted,
Mhm.
so that she can at least raise their children on the outside.
Yeah, what a crazy soap opera and everything. And yeah, and I just remembered the professor that I heard was friends with Dan Markel was Eric Mueller. So have
Okay,
you
sure,
talked
because
to
he's in
him?
the criminal area, and that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm so glad that you have written your books to draw more attention to all these cases and, just make sure that these crimes aren't forgotten and that the deceased people are not forgotten. And there's just so many crazy cases out there that deserve to have attention.
And Judy,
So
guess what the root to all of it is?
what?
It's what you and I do for a living. It's a marriage that went
Mhm,
bad. And
mhm,
the only difference between our clients and the murderers in these books is our clients eventually figure out that they can live with the detente or the relationship that they have with their ex, however bad it is, without
mhm.
resorting to violence. The people involved in these books decided the only way to deal with the issue was by killing their spouse.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, just like with that Laci Peterson case, did you read all about that also? The
Yeah.
Laci Peter I remember her mother was yelling at Scott Peterson, "Divorce was always an option. Murder never is," just like, oh god, it's like, why did these people do this? Now they're in prison forever and
Yeah. And so
they're
my
rep
first book, Jason Young said he couldn't get divorced because he was fearful that Michelle Young would relocate with their daughter to New York, where they had come from. My second book, divorce wasn't an option because Denise Williams didn't want the stigma of being a divorcee, and because she didn't want to share custody of her daughter with her husband. The third book, The Dan Markel case, they were already divorced. But Wendy wanted to relocate with her kids to South Florida, tried the legal route, was denied that opportunity, and stuck in Tallahassee for potentially the rest of her life. Somebody decided that, well, we have to just get rid of Dan Markel, and that's the only way we're going to solve that problem.
Yeah, yeah, it's just really despicable, like, hearing about, like, what these people really did and everything, but thank you for writing these books. I hope all the viewers out there will take a look at Mr. Epstein's different books, as well as the new one that's gonna come out this summer about the Dan Markel case. Yeah, so thank you so much. I know we've exceeded well over an hour and everything, so I appreciate you taking the time out on Sunday to come and talk with us.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Judy, the YouTube lawyer. Excellent.
Well, thank you. Okay, why don't you stay on for a minute and we'll go ahead and say goodbye to the viewers out there. Thanks, everybody. See you next
Thank you.
weekend.